I'm Christine Lagorio-Chafkin, senior writer here at Inc. I'm joined today by Aaron Levie. He's the co-founder and CEO of Box, the enterprise software company. Box has over 100,000 customers now, including big companies like GE and Coca-Cola, and fast-growing ones like Stitch Fix and LegalZoom. Thank you so much for joining us today, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Aaron, we featured Box as Company of the Year in 2014. A lot has changed since then. You've gone public and grown to 100,000 customers. Let's forget about 2020 for a minute. Where were you at the end of 2019 in terms of growth and your company's status in terms of employees and revenue?
Yeah, no, those were certainly 2019 was a better year, I think, for everyone. But we were 2019. We did a little over 600 million in revenue, and we guided this year to being able to achieve around 770 million in revenue. So we're pretty happy about the growth that we've been able to go and drive in the business. It's been a wild journey, certainly since 2014. We went public and have continued to grow the platform over that time period, but been super exciting.
And so then 2020 happened. What did Box, what did you and the management team do come March, and how did the company respond?
Yeah, well, the start of 2020 was great. We were coming into the year with a whole plan and strategy around where we wanted to take our platform and our company and our customers. And we had spent an excruciating amount of time on our kind of corporate plan. Hundreds and hundreds of hours went into it. We had beautiful PDFs and amazing presentations, and then all of a sudden, obviously, March hit and just sort of smacked us in the face of just reality of what are we going to do to deal with what this this urgent healthcare crisis, economic crisis, and operational challenge for so many customers. And at first, in the first couple of weeks, we didn't obviously realize the total impact and scale of this challenge. But what we wanted to do was really prepare for any eventuality that might happen with COVID. So we moved everybody to remote work. We doubled down on serving our customers. We opened up some of our product for free for customers, especially those in affected industries. We changed some of our pricing plans for those customers that were most impacted. And we really focused on just two big variables. One, how do we keep our employees safe and healthy during this environment? And then how do we ensure that we're delivering on our customer success and the promise of making sure that our customers are able to work successfully through this environment? And that's really what the focus has continued to be now, 6 or 7 months later after that initial wave in March.
I'm curious how much of that original roadmap that you went into 2020 with you had to just ditch. Did you have to throw out the entire plan?
Yeah, fortunately, we didn't have to throw out the entire plan. I think, when we started our company 15 years ago, the original idea was we felt that the cloud would enable people and businesses to be able to work securely from anywhere. And so ultimately, while we obviously would never have either predicted or wanted a pandemic to be, one of the drivers of people working from anywhere, I think our product and our platform is well positioned for this environment. And so our strategy has actually remained largely the same throughout this year. We've had to tilt some of the features that we're building, some of the use cases that we're solving for. Obviously, we never imagined that most workforces would go completely remote. And so some of the use cases that are certainly benefited by remote work, we had to double down on because of the fact that all of our customers are now working in that way. So I think, probably a third or a half of our roadmap had to shift, but we also got to have the opportunity to double down in areas that we were already invested in that we knew were going to be even more important to our customer base. And I think, we've tried to build a culture since day one of agility, of speed, of sort of never, being able to predict obviously what's going to happen next in the market. You have to ensure that your company is able to respond to different trends and have that resilience, baked into the core of how you operate and how your company is able to run. And so we're fortunate that we have a culture that is resilient and able to have that level of agility. But we did have to, change the roadmap, make sure that we were better positioned for our customers' needs in this environment.
Aaron, I want to ask you more about that agility, speed, and flexibility that's built into Box as a company. But first, could you tell me what has been for you as a leader the biggest challenge over the past 7 months?
I think for me, it's there's probably been a couple dimensions. One is just the the work itself is obviously, changed pretty massively. How we work, how we do meetings, how we execute, how we collaborate. So making sure that we can build a culture of 2,000 employees that are all able to do that in a way that is integrated and seamless across the company. So that's been hugely important. I would just kind of put that in the core operations of the business. The other side of things is how do you respond in terms of which decisions you have to be making in this environment, given the plethora of, you have economic challenges, you have healthcare challenges, our customers are dealing with issues, our employees are dealing with issues. So you're in a mode, and I think every company, every CEO or leader has been forced to be in this position where you're on one part playing the role of the CDC, on the other part you're playing the role of the Department of Treasury, and you're having to predict all of these different external environmental impacts to your business, and you can make decisions that are fatal or not to your company based on which turn you take, which move you make in the market. And so I think it's really been the most stressful thing has been, when do you decide to make one of those big decisions versus when do you keep your optionality open because you can't quite predict everything that's going to happen next, and you want to have that flexibility and resilience built into to the business. So that's I think maybe the biggest lesson so far is choosing which moments you have to be really decisive in, and which moments you want to have a high degree of flexibility and range of motion depending on the outcome that could occur.
Right. I think that's so fascinating. And it's something I've actually been talking with a lot of CEOs and leaders with. How do you make those big decisions when there's really such an unclear future? And when do you hold off? Is there anything for you that helps you decide whether to make a decision? As we head into 2021, I feel like companies are having a really hard time sort of setting their pace.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two things. One I just stole from Amazon, where Jeff Bezos has this idea of one-way and two-way doors, and the concept is pretty intuitive. You have some kind of doors where you can go through it and you can come back the other way if you were wrong. So a lot of product decisions have that characteristic. You can build a feature and change it or shut it down if customers don't like it. Those are things that are kind of two-way doors. And you can always reverse course as you get new information. One-way doors, though, are areas that you can't really unwind once you make it, right? Fundamental business model decisions are often one-way doors because you're going to get locked into that for many, many years to come. How you think about your culture, how you deal with, do you set a policy of you're going to do remote work forever, or is the plan to have more of a hybrid workforce? These are, while they're not particularly, completely irreversible one-way doors, they're very, very significant to your operations and to your culture going forward. So they're much more one-way doors, and so you want to only go through them when you have a high degree of either certainty or a high degree of judgment that you've been able to have to then go and make that decision. And so we sort of think about it as, for two-way doors, we can have less information, and we can make that decision based on intuition and gut feel and maybe a little bit of data. For one-way doors, we want to make sure that we have a high degree of data and that we're really making a significant judgment call on what direction to go. And I think this environment has thrown both of those types of situations at us and every other company out there.
Yeah. So are you just staying away from one-way doors right now?
I'm doing my. It's probably a situation where it's a Rorschach test of you can see a one-way door or a two-way door depending on how you look at it. I've certainly been trying to avoid as many one-way doors as possible, just because of the amount of uncertainty that exists out there, and we just don't know what's going to happen next. So for areas where we can make incremental decisions and reverse course, let's stick to that, and try and avoid anything that could be a kind of massive change that could ultimately lead to a self-inflicted wound or whatnot that we wouldn't want to have.
Right. I mean, I feel like there's a tug and pull right now between just shuffling your feet and wanting to make progress, wanting to move forward. Everyone's been stuck in this rut for a while. How do you kind of keep your employees from feeling that stuckness too?
I think I guess maybe the thing I've learned from this is almost you have to reframe it as not a rut, but this is the environment we're in. We have to make the most of it. When it was interesting when this first happened, we had to make a pretty specific decision of how do we think about this from a strategy standpoint? Is this a crisis that the world is dealing with? Or is this an environment where people are going to have to adapt how they work, and ultimately maybe even benefit of working in new ways? And so we thought it more as this is probably an environment where companies are going to be looking to unleash their productivity, unleash their ingenuity, unleash their innovation, not an environment where, we are only going to be in crisis mode constantly and everything is sort of negative that we're dealing with. There's a lot of negative, there's a lot of challenges. And I don't, for 1 second, take for, granted the fact that we are in a beneficial position because we're all cloud and we're a software company. There's a lot of companies that don't have those benefits. But to the extent possible, you're going to have to make the most of the situation. And especially now that we're 6 or 7 months into this, it's an environment where you have to, really adapt to this as the new way that we're working for the foreseeable future. And so we have to not make it be this rut or this kind of thrashy environment. It's got to be one where you can make the most of how we're operating right now.
So how have you adapted to the new environment? How have you helped employees adapt to the environment and stay productive even when you are controlling almost nothing about kind of how or where they're working?
Yeah, so I think this is a situation where decisions we made 10 years ago are now finally paying dividends, where the right technology decisions, the right cultural lessons and teachings that we had around agility and around moving quickly and around taking risks and failing fast if those risks aren't kind of proving out to be successful. And so we're benefiting, at least, and we're drafting off of now 15 years of a culture that's been able to be codified around how we want to be working, the tools that we want to be using, the way we want to be working together. And so we've been able to frankly leverage the culture in this environment. There's been areas though where we've had to fundamentally change how we work. So I think it used to be that a lot of our business processes, a lot of our teams would go into an office conference room, maybe 5 or 10 people would be in that meeting or that team. We would go in and we'd have a bunch of meetings and get on a whiteboard and obviously work together. And that was a fantastic way to collaborate. It was a fantastic way to innovate and ideate. At the same time, what we found was actually it was arbitrarily exclusive. Like it just happened to be like who could go to the conference room that day, who happened to be around the whiteboard in the hallway, and those would be the people that would participate and be able to share their ideas or contribute. And so one of the really big upsides of this virtual work is the fact that now we can bring together the company and all parts of the business, different teams, different parts of the organization, all coming together at once and being able to contribute to ideas and be able to push the business forward. So these are things where, I would never have sort of imagined, in an office environment, let's all get on a video call and go and collaborate. But now that we're seeing it, you're imagining a world where even when we go back to the office, that's probably going to be a lot of how we want to be able to do large scale team meetings, because we know we get better participation, we get better ideas, we actually get more inclusion from across the business. So I think, it's been an environment where let's draft off of our culture, but continue to modify it and iterate based on the unique characteristics of working remotely and having this virtual office that we're now all a part of, and making the most of it as opposed to it sort of feeling like a detriment or a disadvantage.
It's so interesting that you say virtual meetings can be more inclusive. I've heard other executives say that they're also an equalizer.
Yeah.
How much of that do you think you're going to really keep? Say 5 years from now, if you would keep those sort of meetings, what else would you keep from the digital way we communicate now and the way your company runs today versus 7 months ago?
I think it's an imperative that we find a way to keep that aspect of how we're working. In fact, just before this session, we were on a call with a couple hundred employees at Box, and we are simultaneously presenting an update to our strategy, and we have a Zoom chat on the other side where people are asking questions and contributing ideas. And half the things that people brought up were things that we hadn't ever thought of. The team that was presenting hadn't thought about that particular part of the strategy or that idea. And so in any other situation, any other configuration you would have in the real world, we would never have that kind of contribution happening, for that project or for that particular initiative. So it's pretty amazing when you think about, well, what happens when your organization is digitally flat? Even if you have a hierarchy, like what if the way we work together is much flatter? And so now I can contribute the ideas on any critical project where I might be able to add value even though maybe somebody wouldn't normally have thought to come ask me for that idea. So that's something that we want to make sure it continues to carry forward in a post-pandemic world. So I think working virtually, I think having more flexibility around where and when you come into the office, I think that's going to be important. I think being able to pull together more talent pools from around the world is also going to be a characteristic of the post-pandemic world. And ultimately, I think there's actually a lot more upside in this future of work than downside going forward.
What do you imagine a large company headquarters like your own? I know you have several large offices around the world, but say one of either the San Francisco or is it Redwood City office? Like what will that look like in 5 years? Do you think?
Yeah, so I would say you don't want to come to me for office layout based questions. I have absolutely no vision on that front because unfortunately my tendency is to pack large amounts of people into small spaces. So I'm going to say we're going to just watch what happens in the market and learn from everybody else on that one.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine what other companies might do? Don't think about your own and your desire to pack them in. That's obviously no longer the way we're thinking. But I mean, do you have any other predictions for what the workplace sort of will look like, feel like, be? I mean, or are we going to be thinking of the workplace as more of a virtual space?
Yeah, I think you've got lots of different takes. So, one take is that these become these sort of virtual environment first, and then you go into the office for some degree of collaboration and teamwork. Some companies are saying, okay, it's really just the same office, but a little bit more reimagined. People have more space. You're a little bit more spread out. And then I think you have some companies that are saying, hey, I'm going to throw out the office altogether. I really think it's more of a preference per company. I think each company has, idiosyncrasies about its culture that they want to, make sure to harness and concentrate on. And then you'll see the office layout and the way we work together will be frankly, kind of outputs of what is that underlying culture that you're trying to create as an organization.
Great. Let's get back to productivity. You've said that one of the most defining characteristics for an organization in 2020 is its flexibility. Now, that's something that an organization sort of would already have had to have baked in. Box had a lot of it. But how can a company that maybe didn't have it as much, or a company that's just growing now, build in that flexibility? What is it kind of comprised of?
Yeah, well, I unfortunately have a very simple way of thinking about this one. So I don't know if how this will go over, but I think it's actually fairly Darwinistic. The companies that aren't flexible just are probably either already gone or they're not going to make it. So the market is going to force companies right now to have that flexibility. So you could try and learn it and try and teach it, but the reality is your company has to adapt in this environment to be able to survive and thrive. And so if you're not able to kind of, pivot areas where your business model needs to be modified for this market, if you're not able to pivot the way that your employees work together and collaborate, if you're not able to pivot your product experiences to better serve customers, you won't make it. So there's not really another alternative that's available to you as an organization right now. And I think that companies, anybody who's thinking they're going to hold on to an old way of working or an old approach to business models, those companies will just simply not make it. So the market will force those organizations to either adapt or die, unfortunately.
And what about folks just starting out? I mean, firstly, let me ask this question in two parts. Would you start a company right now if you were companyless and starting out all over again? And two, if you did, how could you actually build in that flexibility? What are the ways of decision making? What are the ways of thinking to become a kind of agile organization?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that I would definitely start a business right now, but with the caveat being that you have to just make sure that it's a business that makes sense in this environment. I think that there's a tendency to sort of say, the best companies are built in recessions and these various, kind of things. That's actually, like, scientifically, I don't even know if that's necessarily true, because when Facebook started, it wasn't a recession. When Google started, it wasn't a recession. So there's certainly been plenty of great companies built in recessions, but it's not a uniquely great time to build a company. What the time you want to build a company is when you have an idea that the market needs. And that you have the right team to go and execute on that. And what this environment uniquely offers is plenty of opportunity for great ideas. And partly because you have a lot of incumbents that aren't going to be as flexible, aren't going to be able to move as quickly to address the new needs that are emerging from customers. So that creates new opportunity. And you just have a whole bunch of new ways that the world is starting to work, starting to communicate, starting to spend personal time. And that leads to there being change in the marketplace that new startups can go and address and grow and create solutions for. So I think it's a fantastic time to start a company if you have a great idea and if that idea is aligned to the broader trends that are occurring in the market. As it relates to kind of flexibility being built into the startup, maybe this is just a personal bias. I think most startups are forced to have that flexibility, again, because oftentimes when you're starting out a company, you just need to be able to constantly be iterating your idea, your business model, your team, the team design, the decisions. And I've met a very small number of companies where the thing they're doing on day one is exactly the same thing they're doing a year later or 3 years later or 10 years later. And so the only way that you survive is by being able to pivot through the different circumstances that exist. And I think the best lesson on how to do that is trial by fire. Like, you just got to get in there and experience it and just make sure you're pivoting to ensure your company is successful.
Yeah. Aaron, you're also an angel investor. I'm curious, kind of what's the word on the street in Silicon Valley, and what kind of innovation have you been seeing recently? How's deal flow? Like, what is going on right now in the angel investing world, and is it actually a good time to start a company?
Well, I'm not super active, but occasionally there are really interesting ideas that I feel like could be transformational for an industry or a segment of the market. And so I do a little bit of investing, but I think in general, more broadly, I think that I've seen more startups launch probably in the past 6 or 12 months than maybe any other point that I can think of. And part of that is companies that were already preparing to launch. Because the market's been great for startups for the past couple of years. So some of these are ideas that have existed and now they're just being tilted to support this new way of remote work and remote ways of communicating and social experiences, et cetera. But there's also been companies that have been created net new because of this new environment that we're in. And I think it's a great opportunity right now to be able to start a company. Again, contingent on having a great idea that is going to that starts to be necessary because of the new problems that are emerging right now.
For Box, one of the biggest changes that you made was really early on, right? Listening to customers and becoming an enterprise solution. Today, when I think of Box, I think, cloud computing, it used to be, and cloud storage, used to be such a new thing when you started out and an increasingly necessary thing. But now it's all about data security. To what extent is Box a data security company these days rather than just, a cloud storage one?
Yeah, so I think what we've realized is, and this goes back a few years, but what we realized was as you put your information into the cloud, you have to now start to do way more with that information. You want to be able to secure it. You want to be able to automate workflows on it. You want to be able to collaborate in a seamless way. So over time, our platform has evolved to being way more than just storing the files, but actually being able to be a full platform to help you manage all of that content and all of that information. And so security is absolutely one of those really big pillars that we focus on at Box to help customers protect their most important information.
So, do you ever call it a security company? Or is it, to what extent is it more so than just cloud?
Yeah, I think I would say that almost every company, if you're storing customer data, you have to become a security company because as information gets digitized, you're in many cases holding on to some of the most sensitive information and bits for any business or any consumer. And so I think we have to be a security company just in the same way that Facebook has to be a security company, or other platforms that are holding on to your prized possessions are going to have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, so much of when I think of data security right now, I'm thinking about the upcoming election. But for companies with now recently distributed workforces, there's all these security challenges that come along with having a remote workforce. Can you talk a little bit about that? And aside from just using Box, we don't need for this to be a commercial for Box. But what else can small companies especially do to keep their data secure and their employees safe when they're working remotely?
Yeah, well, I mean, I appreciate it. I would certainly love it to be a Box advertisement, but the good news is there's a lot of innovation happening in security right now for businesses of all sizes, frankly. But I think the unique characteristic of moving to remote work is basically everybody's effectively working from probably their personal computers for the most part, and they're on personal networks that they manage as opposed to traditionally IT managing that network. So you have two major new vectors of vulnerability. You have the computer itself and you have the network that people are on, which means that you have to actually have some really, really great technology to help you secure that information that you're working with. So some examples, I would think about identity management. So how do you protect the identities of the users that are inside of your organization? A product like Okta is incredibly effective at that. You also have to protect the networks that people are working on. So great examples of technology there are a company called Cloudflare will help you protect the access that people have on the different devices they're working from, or Palo Alto Networks. So I think there's a lot of innovation happening in security that will help businesses of all sizes. But for any business of any size, you have to make sure that fundamentally you are protecting customer information, employee information, even as there's so much more collaboration happening across devices, across platforms, and across networks.
You have more than 2,000 employees. How many of those are engineers, and what advice would you give for other founders in hiring tech talent virtually?
Yeah, so we don't break out the stats, but we do have a large engineering team within the organization, and I think right now it's there's certainly never been a better time to be able to hire great engineering talent, technical talent, especially remotely. So I think there's a bunch of best practices on how to do great interviews and onboarding. We focused a tremendous amount on new employee onboarding. How do we make new employees as productive as possible and able to be ingrained in our culture as quickly as possible, because we think that's super important that they feel a part of the team. They're able to make an impact and a dent on the company right out of the gate. So those are the things I would definitely focus on prioritizing.
That's great, but culture is so difficult to get right when everything is virtual. I feel like there's a tendency to tell people what a culture at a company is rather than to show them, and that showing them is what's really the magic, and showing them is so much more difficult when it's all virtual. So how do you kind of bring new employees in virtually and make them feel the culture that existed before, or feel the culture that is now, and make that culture good?
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, you're kind of raising like the big problem that everybody's dealing with. So I don't know that we've particularly figured out better than anybody else, but what I would say is that culture is not something that, I mean, culture you train on, you reinforce, you teach, but it's really what people experience and how you act. So ultimately, our best way of conveying our culture is through how we execute, how we operate, the way we make decisions, the lessons that we're teaching fellow employees and Boxers about why we made a certain decision. What characteristic of our culture led to us doing this in a way that was successful or unsuccessful. So we are constantly, making sure that we drive the organization based on the values that we've set out. We have 7 core values, and that effectively shows up in our culture every single day, which allows us to have, I think, a culture that is both, hopefully very inclusive, but also one where we all have a shared view of our organization and what we want to accomplish and how we want to work together. But it can only be done through execution. It can only be done through actions. It can't be done through a webinar or a PowerPoint presentation. So it really is, how do we all show up every single day in the decisions that we're making and in the ways that we're acting with one another.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about shared goals and communication there. In terms of communicating transparently from leadership, that's also been a big thing that you've spoken about in the past, and that Box stresses. How do you manage that in this uncertain time? How do you be a transparent leader where you're sharing your goals, sharing your roadmap with employees, when sometimes there's not a complete roadmap, or when sometimes those decisions keep changing? Is there a way that you've come to think about how to best communicate with folks when maybe all the answers aren't clear?
Yeah, I think I think the realities and the number of things that are unclear, to the things that are clear, has that ratio, unfortunately, has gotten very out of whack this year. So I think the reality is transparency is the only way to get through that, because people are going to know when when that the answer isn't there. But being able to be upfront and addressing why do we not have the answer yet? We need more time. We need more data. We need more customer evidence. We need more market evidence. We don't know where the economy is going. We don't know where the healthcare crisis is going. So here's what we do know. Here's what we don't know. And based on that context, here are the decisions we're going to make and why we're going to make those decisions. So I think right now for anybody leading a team, whether it's 5 people or thousands, context is key and transparency is key. And if you can do both those things most of the time, your organization and your team is going to both appreciate it, but have a better sense of why different decisions are being made, or frankly, why certain decisions haven't yet been made. And maybe why you're trying to keep that optionality open.
Yeah, I like that idea of communicating what you don't know. Do you ever ask for help figuring that stuff out from your broader team, not just your leadership team?
I would say that whether I ask for it or not, it comes full force at me. So I probably could do a better job sort of soliciting for that. But the great news is we have a culture of a high degree of candor. And if you looked at my chat messages during any meeting, there's people pinging me nonstop of, hey, what about this idea? Why didn't we do this? Have you seen this? What about that? What's going on there? And so I think you want to try and create a culture where people feel comfortable to constantly be throwing out new ideas and there's going to be any organizational leader of any scale, there's always going to be a limit of what you can see relative to what everybody else is seeing, all the blind spots you have, the rest of the market intelligence that they have. And so you need to make sure that you're creating an environment where people want to give you that feedback. They want to give you that data as much as possible.
Do you have any tips for how founders can do that from the get-go? Is it just having humility and just being open? I mean, but how can they make sure they're doing that?
Well, certainly if you can solicit feedback in a very open and public way, I think that ends up creating the right level of encouragement for people. And I think there's sort of this term that I don't know if it's overused, but maybe it's sometimes misunderstood of like this idea of a safe space. Like, hey, like we want your feedback. Like there's no bad idea that you're going to be able to bring up, or no bad question about that you're going to have about the challenges that we're facing. So we want to hear them. We want to hear those ideas. And anytime you create too high of a bar for people to contribute, or too much risk for people to contribute, or people are afraid of like, oh, how am I going to be perceived by my manager if I speak up in a meeting? If you create an environment that has that kind of friction or challenges or kind of politics, then no one's going to be willing to do that. And maybe you'll be right a lot of the time as a leader, but the moment you're wrong, nobody's going to tell you, and you're going to be completely screwed as a business. And so really you want to build a culture that lets there be that conversation and that dialogue as much as possible. And it means that you have to have a relatively thick skin, because people are going to call you out on things that maybe it was your idea, and people are being like, no, that's a really stupid idea. And you're like, shit, but I thought it was a great idea. And then, ultimately you get that feedback and you reflect on it. You're like, okay, maybe I'm missing something. And you have to adapt, and people have to see that you're able or willing to do that to then believe that they can give that feedback. And again, the thing I would underscore is like, I'm talking as if I know all the answers here. I'm sure if any Box employee were watching this, they'd probably be like, you suck at all of these things that you're saying. The point is that I know what I should be doing. And I every day I just try to get a little bit better at doing it.
That's so great. Do you have any kind of benchmark or making a mental note over how often you should be told you're wrong to know that it's actually happening?
Well, I don't know. It's a great question. I guess if you're told too much, then one would question, maybe you're in the wrong role. But so I don't have a good percentage for you. Maybe you want to be wrong like 15% of the time. That feels like a good number.
Yeah, and maybe you're told then like 5%. I don't know. I mean, I feel like you're never going to achieve complete honesty from your circle of friends or your colleagues, but there should be some.
I think what you'd actually you want to be told you're wrong more often than you're actually wrong. And then you want to be able to identify the times when somebody else is wrong about you being wrong. And if you can do that well, then I think it's probably good. So I probably get told I'm wrong 30% of the time. But I think there's a little bit of a margin of times where I'm actually right when people said I'm wrong. And those are the hardest times, because those are the moments when you have to say, you know what, we're going to move forward on this. I'm sorry, I've heard out all the opinions. This is the decision, and that's ultimately the stuff that's difficult. And again, sometimes actually I make that decision and I'm actually wrong. So I thought that the feedback was wrong. I thought I was right, and then I was ultimately wrong. So there's a lot of different variables at play in this world right now.
This is very true. So to get out of the I'm wrong about you being wrong about you being wrong cycle, let me ask you a piece of Box history. I know that you and your co-founder started Box out of your parents' house, and I love this piece of I guess I'd call it Silicon Valley trivia, but you got your first piece of funding by cold emailing Mark Cuban. Is that right?
Yeah, so it was in the most technical sense, it was our kind of first big round of funding. We had a couple of small angels, but yes, that was the big round that helped propel us.
Great. So what other piece of Box's history do you think should be in Silicon Valley's lore that might not be currently?
Oh wow, I would say that a lot is out there. I mean, we pivoted pretty aggressively to the enterprise early on. I think one thing that I'm very proud of is we at the very early stage of our journey really tried to perfect this model of a more end user led enterprise software business model. And I think what's great is that we've had some amazing companies like Zoom and Slack and others really even take it to the next level, which has been awesome to see. But when we were just getting started, we were kind of 21, 22 years old, the founding team, when we pivoted to the enterprise. And we just couldn't imagine a world where we could compete with Microsoft and all these other big companies with only like 10 or 20 people in a garage effectively. So the question was, how would we actually do that? And so what we realized was, well, let's go and focus on users, and let's build the amazing software for the end user, and then we'll be able to kind of get virally adopted within enterprises. So that was something that early on we're very proud to have put a huge amount of focus on. A lot of people didn't believe that would work. That was one of those examples where everybody was saying we were wrong. I in that case, I felt we were right. My founding team also felt we were right. So we made that bet, and ultimately it led to a lot of the early growth as a company.
That's great. Do you remember what you were thinking leading up to making that decision? How quickly did that decision come?
Well, so the decision to pivot was actually a long decision, because that was a one-way door. And while I didn't know that framework at the time, the part that I was stressful about was basically, once we make this decision, there's really no going back. We're going to be an enterprise software company through and through. And my co-founders and some early employees actually had to convince me that was the right decision. So this would be the reverse example where I was wrong around where our business was going. The team had to forcefully kind of make it clear to me that the market, the big opportunity was in enterprise software. And then we basically made the pivot, and then we never looked back. But again, a great example where if we didn't have that degree of candor in the team, left alone, I may have made the wrong decision, and it wouldn't have worked out.
Aaron, you recently tweeted that the best product ideas live at the intersection of duh and holy shit. How do you get to that intersection, and are there any other landmarks there people would recognize?
That idea is really this essence where I think if you look back and really the best innovations that we've seen, and they can be individual products, they can be entire companies. Usually what the feeling you should have is simultaneously this feeling of like, it's so weird that didn't exist before. And that's the duh part. It's just like, yeah, like, I mean, duh, that like that should exist. I don't know why I don't have it. I should have already been using it. And then the holy shit is like, wow, the way that this is coming together, the way it works opens up so much new possibility, so many, sort of extensions of that idea. Like this is sort of, mind blowing of what could happen if this thing really took off. And that's really what that intersection is. In terms of how to find that intersection, I mean, there's no silver bullet on that one. That is the journey that we all collectively have to go through. But I think, tips along the way is look for problems that you see in the market where constantly customers are running into the same problem. They're beating their head against the wall. And there hasn't been a big breakthrough in that space. What I tend to look for, certainly at Box when we build products, is are there situations where if you went and talked to 10 customers or 20 customers or 50 customers and you said, hey, how do you solve X or how do you do X? You would get back dozens and dozens of different answers. And every single time people would feel like they're pained by the answer. That's a really good sweet spot. If you can find things that people hate doing, that everybody does differently and is a big enough problem, usually there's really big opportunity and solutions in those spaces to go after.
What is Box's biggest challenge, and what's your personal biggest challenge going forward right now?
I think for us, we're just honestly continuing to focus on the basics that we know how to do really well, and build amazing products, serve our customers to make them incredibly successful, build a great culture where we can execute and operate in a very dynamic way. I think the biggest challenge, honestly, is just continuing to do that amidst all the different challenges, all the different disruptions, all the different factors going on in the market. I think companies, for good reason, live and die by how great their products are, how much customers want those products, and can they maintain a strong culture that lets them sustainably deliver those products to the market very quickly. And that will always remain, I think, the essence of certainly my job and the job of the folks that I work with.
Great. Thank you so much, Aaron Levie, for being with us today.
Hey, thank you.